A quick heads up, this video covers some not so fun topics, and the last thing I want is for you guys not to feel comfortable watching my content. So if you have a hard time with graphic images or descriptions, I recommend setting this one out. But don't worry, I'll go back to my regular style of videos soon. Hope you enjoy, and had a happy Halloween. Creepypastas have been around for over 2 decades, and with it being Halloween, it's November 7th, ya dummy. I thought it'd be a perfect opportunity to talk about some of the classic creepypastas from the 2010s. And with it being a special occasion, I thought I'd bring a friend along. It also helps that you won't only hear my voice for however long this video is. Say hi, Lem.
Hey everybody. Say, what is a creepypasta anyway? I'm gonna look this up. Alright, it says here, copypasta is a genre of user-generated paranormal and scary stories distributed largely via internet forums. It is a subgenre of copypasta. Okay, so that's how it got the name then, I guess.
Yep, just about sums it up. Although there are some amazing creepy things on the internet that scared you as a kid, some sadly don't fit the cut. Although, there might be 1 or 2 exceptions to that rule. But let's not keep everyone waiting, so let's get started. Slender Man has to be one of, if not the most recognizable creepypasta on this list. His popularity was unmatched in the early 2010s. Well, almost, but that's for later. Slender Man was created on June 10th, 2009 by Eric K., also known as Victor Surge. Eric entered a Photoshop contest on the Something Awful forums, where the forum users were challenged to create paranormal images. After taking inspiration from various other horror stories, primarily from Zach Parsons' That Insidious Beast, Stephen King's The Mist, H.P. Lovecraft's various pieces of work, and a lot more from various pieces of media. Eric sent in his entry, being 2 photographs of Slender Man appearing in the background. Underneath the art was what seemed to be reports from an unknown source, suggesting that the kids in the photograph were kidnapped by the Slender Man. Slender Man is shown to be a tall, humanoid figure with no facial features. It's hard to tell if he's wearing it or not, but later interpretations gave him his iconic suit. The people on the forum quickly took a liking to Slender. One user came up with the Der Grobeman, which was a folklore story set in 16th century Germany, suggesting that Slender Man has been around for hundreds of years. Just 10 days after the original images of Slender Man were posted on the forum, Troy Wagner posted the first video of his ARG series based on Slender Man called Marble Hornets. The series was pretty popular, with a lot of mysterious messages and hidden lore in the videos. It kept viewers interested as they tried to solve the clues. The series lasted about 3 seasons from June 20th, 2009 to June 20th, 2014. In 2015, a spin-off movie was produced based on the series. Reception was pretty mixed, with it being mostly negative. Oh, before I forget, Slender Man is referred to as the Operator in this series. In 2012, a game was released called Slender: The 8 Pages, and man, was this popular. Not just with fans of the character, but this was around the time that Let's Plays began to take off, and this was the go-to game for people to get scared by. You might remember Markiplier, or PewDiePie, or so many others playing it back then. The game, and the people playing the game, helped boost him to what I would say is the peak of Slender Man's popularity. In 2014, a very serious event took place. I won't be getting into it here because I don't believe I'm fit to talk about it, but I can talk about one thing. All of these topics in this video are either urban legends or just stories created to spook people. They're not real. Please, just be careful online. Especially if you have a child, just be mindful of what they're watching. I know I sound like a PSA from the 2000s. Anyway, in 2016, development of a Slender Man feature film began, and full production on the film began in 2017. It was released in 2018 to extremely poor reception. I haven't seen it, but yeah, most of the reviews say the film is awful. That's about the last big thing that's happened with Slender, unless you count the Friday Night Funkin' mods recently. Slender was one I remember did scare me when I first heard about it, but over time, I mean, don't get me wrong, the design is still unsettling, and if done right, it can get a good spook out of me. I believe that Slender is definitely one of the top creepypasta creations, at least with his popularity from the 2010s. I'd say he was only rivaled by...
Chances are, if you've been around the internet in the early 2010s, you know about Jeff the Killer. Or at the very least, you've seen the picture it's based off of. The story focuses around a boy named Jeffrey Woods,
who starts off as the protagonist of the story and then becomes the antagonist by the end. Over the course of the story, he slowly becomes a serial killer, and by the end, when a fight breaks out with the school bully, he gets disfigured after being set on fire, in which the sight of his face drives him mad. The story itself is a simple one, and inspired a bunch of spin-offs and remakes later along the line. Many fan works include Jane the Killer, fan art of him with Slender Man, and even a remake in 2015. The original story was written by Game Fuel TV, and some people still don't even know when it was first originally published. What's even more strange is the origin of the original image. Some believe it was a Photoshop picture of a woman named Katie Robinson who committed suicide because of cyberbullying when she visited 4chan, although it was disproven many times. Around 2015, the original creator of Jeff the Killer sat down for an interview. In the interview, they claimed that the Katie Robinson suicide was a bogus story. They also claimed that it was just a picture of themselves wearing a white latex mask, which is even more strange because it's not true as well. The earliest sightings of the image were actually found between 2007 and 2005. The one in August 2007 being a Japanese horror film project titled Victims of Tomorrow, which also includes text that says good night, which could have possibly been a precursor to go to sleep, Jeff the Killer's catchphrase. There is a story claiming that the first instance of the image was back in 2005. The story claims that the picture was of a woman named Victoria. She streamed on a website known as Stickum back in 2005, in which one user took a screenshot of her face, posted it, and acted like they were her with the caption, "Am I pretty?" which then started a chain of different users photoshopping the image more and more to make her more disfigured. Then after finding out about this series of events, Victoria stopped streaming and vanished off the internet. Despite not being very well written, Jeff the Killer was a huge hit. There are tons of fan projects around the internet for him. Just looking up his name will give you endless amounts of fan art. While it may not be as big now, it was a huge hit in the early 2010s. Hell, I remember seeing art of it everywhere. If you ever want to go through the classics of creepypasta, you absolutely cannot skip over Jeff the Killer. It's just too important. It's content like this, Slender Man and Ben Drown, that made creepypastas how popular they are today. If you're looking for an entertaining way to listen to the story, I highly recommend checking out Internet Historian's reading of it. It's really funny and has a lot of cool people behind it. Without further ado, on to the next creepypasta.
Man, Lavender Town is such a nice place. It has a huge tower which is just a Pokemon graveyard, ghost haunting said graveyard, and the most unsettling music I've ever experienced in a video game. For such a cheerful game about catching Pokemon and becoming a master, dealing with death wasn't something most kids were expecting, which is why I think this urban legend gained a following, with some extra goodies we'll talk about later. The Lavender Town Syndrome story was first uploaded to Pastebin on February 21st, 2010, and quickly spread around to sites like 4chan. Versions of the story with radically different details were popping up also, but I'm gonna stick with the original story that was posted on Pastebin. The story is extremely long, so a link will be in the description, but I'll give the shortest breakdown I can. Around the time of Pokemon Red and Green's release, children in Japan began killing themselves in various ways. An investigation began as the police gathered all the cartridges from the victims and went to question the developers of the game. They didn't learn much at first, but they were informed of a rumor that the music of Lavender Town was to blame for the children's suicides. The detectives quickly doubted this, as when booting up the game from the victims, they noticed they only made it a couple minutes into the game, and unless they were performing speedrun magic, there would be no way they could make it to Lavender Town. They receive a list of all the programmers, and find out that one of the programmers, Chiro Miura, committed suicide shortly after the game's release. They sat down with Koji Nishino, who was a friend of Chiro, and they began to ask what Chiro might have done with the game. After a little bit of talking, Koji takes out a handgun from under the sofa and shoots himself. Okay. After a couple months of nothing, they receive a note from Chiro from before his passing. The note was him begging Koji to let him work on Red and Green. They learn that the programmers worked in pairs, with Chiro working with Mr. Tamada. They go to Mr. Tamada's house and ask him about the game. The next part of the story is told through a transcript of an audio recording. Mr. Tamada talks normally in the beginning, but begins to say that Chiro is weak and would do anything for recognition. He says that he told Chiro to put the deadly secret in the game, and that after Chiro learned what he'd done, he couldn't live with himself. Mr. Tamada threatens to jump out a window as he reveals some clues on how to get to the secret, and as one of the officers is about to shoot him, something happens to the audio, and Tamada and the officers are found dead. The story jumps 10 years into the future to the lead detective looking through letters and notes from the investigation. For some reason, he takes out one of the Pokemon Red cartridges they had confiscated years ago. He boots up the game using his dead son's Game Boy, which he conveniently keeps in the drawer. He plays the game like normal, but begins to hear Mr. Tamada's voice telling him to go to the first grass area. He decides, why not, and goes in. His face drops as he reads the text on screen. It's his dead wife and son begging for him to follow them. After a while, the game goes back to normal with the detective screaming for them to come back. While this happens, his room is suddenly filled with dead children begging to see their parents. The detective tries to move him out of the way as he hears a familiar voice. It was Mr. Tamada, telling him to follow him. As he shows the detective his old gun, the detective knows what he must do. He puts the gun against his head and, well, you know. The detective's body is found a couple days later, with the last detective who was working on the case taking all 104 cartridges and burning them all, making sure they are all destroyed. Although, the code is said to have survived. I'm gonna be honest, this story was not what I was expecting. You know, with it being called Lavender Town Syndrome, you'd think it'd be more about Lavender Town. They do mention the rumor, but that's it. I'd say the version of the story that's popular and most people know is probably a later one, but I wanted to talk about the original one. Another thing about the story that sticks out like a sore thumb is actually name-dropping developers, because, they're still alive. Unless they've been working for the past 25 years while being dead, because damn, that's a grind. You know, most people only remember this story for being about kids killing themselves after hearing the Lavender Town music for too long. And I'm gonna be honest, before I did research on this video, I swore that was the story. I feel like that version was believable because of an episode of the Pokemon anime that did cause children to get sick. Episode 30 of the anime had moments of quick flashing blue and red lights, which caused some kids to have to go to the hospital. It's really easy to see why people enjoy it though. Lavender Town is such an uneasy place, and with it being such a mood shift in the game, it was bound to have some creepy stories. Well, alright, I've had my turn. Why don't we let Lem continue with...
Abandoned by Disney is fairly well known and goes into more detail than most of the stories I've read for this video, so buckle up, because this is going to be an interesting ride. Our story begins with the writer informing us of a former Disney resort, Treasure Island. It was located in the Bahamas, more precisely Baker's Bay. It was a place where the Disney cruise ships would actually leave tourists, and Disney would end up investing a whopping $30 million on it. And just like that, they abandoned it entirely. They blamed it on shallow waters and the laziness of workers. The writer then brushes off these as mere excuses due to a resort called Mowgli's Palace. Built in North Carolina in the late 1990s and was fairly controversial from the very start. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties to Disney. Then there was apparent concept art, in which men and women were shown in loincloths and tribal gear in the jungle. Yeah, it wasn't such a good look. Despite the amount of people against it, much like Treasure Island, it was promptly dumped, simply due to controversy. The resort was decently successful, but then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down, and those who didn't want it there had a good laugh about it. After hearing about the findings in the abandoned resort, our writer decided to head out and see it for themselves. After a few rude gestures from the locals and a bit of searching, they found it. The entrance was a huge wooden gate that had been nearly destroyed by local wildlife. On the gate was a metal sheet reading, "Abandoned by Disney." They brushed it off as some sign of protest and trekked through the broken remains of the resort, finding plants, stone, and charred bits all over. They then approached the palace, yet again reading, "Abandoned by Disney," among walls of graffiti. The place was empty. Everything within emptied, to the point that all that remained was the things too big to steal. They then found themselves in the kitchen. In the freezer, there were several meat hooks swinging back and forth. Bathrooms were not much better in terms of their current state, with leaking water and missing sinks. There were many rooms left unsearched, but most were just wrecked the same. They then heard a whispered conversation as it was echoing through the hallways, followed by soft weeping. They nervously continued on, encountering a huge python that lived in the now emptied reptile house. Shortly after finding another sheet of metal, reading, you guessed it, abandoned by Disney. There was a staircase that led down to a set of locked doors with a real sign this time, mascots only, with the padlock still in place. The writer was relieved to finally have something of interest. They then promptly broke into the room. It still had almost everything in it. Tables, clocks, chairs, and an old static-filled television. They then walked through the molding, rotten floor and arrived at another room, Character Prep 1. They tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. As they were just ready to give up, the door creaked open. As they walked through, it was pitch black. Luckily, the lights slowly turned on, at first blinding, then steadying. And there they were. Disney mascot costumes hung on the walls. The next costume found was odd. A photo-negative Mickey Mouse mascot lying flat on its back. Deciding to photograph it later, they decided to set up a picture with the costumes. As they went to pick up the molding, rotten head of the Donald Duck mascot, there was a sudden clattering sound. As they looked down, they found a human skull just between their feet. They quickly dropped it and went to take a picture. Disney had to be responsible for this. Only shortly after for the Mickey costume to begin standing up on its own. They frantically attempted to take a picture of it, only for the picture to be nothing but dead pixels in the shape of the costume, and then the camera died. Then in an almost perfect Mickey Mouse voice, it then said, "Hey, wanna see my head come off?" As it started tearing at its own head, it leaked thick yellow blood. The writer, terrified, then bolted for the exit, on their way out finding a clawed message reading "Abandoned by God." It was clear why Disney was so secretive about this place. They didn't want anyone like them getting in, and they didn't want anything like that getting out. And that's basically the story. I love this one. And what makes it all the more neat to me is that both Treasure Island and Mowgli's Palace are real abandoned resorts, albeit with slightly different names from what I remember. I recommend checking those out. This one is a must-read, and from what I know is fairly well known. Much like...
Squidward's Suicide, or Red Mist, is a shorter one. This lost episode style creepypasta was posted on the 7chan paranormal board by an anonymous individual on April 6, 2010. The original poster, or LP, claims to have been an intern at Nick Studios a little while after the first SpongeBob movie released. They worked with the editors and animators, meaning they got to watch the episodes before release to make sure everything was good. They mentioned that before the episodes are finalized, crude humor isn't out of the ordinary with the staff. So when the title said Squidward's Suicide, they thought of it as a twisted joke. The episode plays like normal. Squidward practices for a concert that night while SpongeBob annoys him, but it cuts to the end of the concert as everyone, including SpongeBob, boos him off stage. OP comments on how the crowd has realistic eyes, and not in the typical close-up shot style the show has for some jokes, but just real-looking eyes. Cuts to Squidward crying in his room with no audio, until the sound of a slight breeze is barely audible. The crying can now be heard, almost as if they were in the room and not just hearing it from speakers. An image pops up for a frame, so they go back to see what it is. Definitely not talking about that. It's too graphic and disturbing. I completely forgot about this part of the story until I did research for this video. If you want to read the story, it's in the description, but fair warning, it's pretty graphic. The crew is shocked at what they just saw, and hoping it was only a sick joke, they keep watching the episode. The screen cuts to Squidward, with blood coming from his eyes. Not just any blood, hyper-realistic blood. Almost as if you could touch the screen and have it all over your hands. Another image pops up, which again, it's too graphic for this video. Squidward just stares at the screen as the episode quickly plays a graphic scene. Again, no. At this point, the lead sound editor calls in Steven Hillenburg, the creator of the series Rest His Soul, to see what's happening. As he makes his way in, they start back up the episode. All sound is gone as Squidward just stares at the screen. He puts a shotgun up to his mouth and pulls the trigger. Hillenburg is angry at what he just watched and demands to know what's going on, but everyone is just as clueless as he is. They check the files to see if it was edited, which it was, 24 seconds before they started watching. All the hardware checks out, so there was no possible explanation of why that played. OP ends the story by saying they've never believed in unexplainable phenomena, but now they have to think twice about this thing. I know I'm gonna say this for about almost every single topic in this video, but Squidward's Suicide is a certified classic. From what I could find, this is one of the oldest instances where the most famous creepypasta trope is used, something being hyper-realistic or having hyper-realistic blood. I was honestly surprised to find that the date when this story was released. I thought it came out in 2011 or 2012, but thanks to a Reddit post of all things, I was able to find not only the date, but a screenshot of the original post. The person who posted it claims to have been the one to write Squidward's suicide, and being honest, the screenshot helps their case seeing as I couldn't find any other screenshots. They said they were bored and just read some other lost episode creepypastas and decided to write one themselves. In the episode SpongeBob in Random Land, Squidward from this story makes an appearance, given the name Red Miss Squidward. When asked if this meant the creepypasta was canon, Vincent Waller, who was at the time the show's co-executive producer, said that, no, other than poking fun at that ridiculous fanfiction, it is far from canon. Funny enough, this joke got censored in later airings of the episode. This image somehow disturbs me more than suicidal Squidward.
When I saw the name for this one, I had to do it. I've always been a big fan of The Simpsons, especially the early seasons, which lines up perfectly with this creepypasta. I haven't heard anyone really talk about it before, which got me pretty excited to read through it. The story begins with the original poster making claims about a lost season 1 episode of The Simpsons. The episode is claimed to be written entirely by Matt Groening, and during the first season's production was, quote, very quiet, nervous, and morbid. Mentioning this to anyone who was present would result in them getting very angry and forbidding you to ever mention it to them. Needless to say, this didn't stop our storyteller from pursuing Matt anyway. They followed and asked him about it, causing him to break down, pass them a note, and beg them never to speak of it again. The note contained a website address, which conveniently leads to a download of the lost episode in question. The episode would then begin usually at first, but as it went on, things seemed off, each character acting strange, including Bart, who had an odd hatred for his parents. The episode started with the titular family going on a plane trip. Pretty normal stuff. That is until Bart finds himself opening a window and getting sucked out, and of course, falling to his death. It would then cut to a shot of a, quote, almost photorealistic drawing of his dead body. It would hang on this shot until Act 2 starts. Act 2 would then begin with the Simpsons family crying as the animation warps and deforms. This would go on for the entire act, and lead into Act 3. When Act 3 starts, 1 year has passed, and the now skeletally thin family visits Bart's grave. The family cries as the camera zooms in on Homer, who is said to have told a joke, but you can't hear it in the video apparently. The shot would then zoom out slowly, showing every other tombstone in the graveyard, and upon reading every stone in the graveyard, it would have the name of every future Simpsons guest star. This also is said to include the ones that weren't even in yet. All the real guest stars who hadn't died yet would have their actual death dates written on them, strangely enough. Guests such as Michael Jackson and George Harrison. The credits were then completely silent and seemed handwritten, which would then cut to the final image of the Simpsons family on their couch, much like the intro. They're all drawn in a hyper-realistic, lifeless style, similar to that of Bart's corpse. The storyteller then goes on to mention that the death dates of the guest stars that haven't even been on yet were all the exact same date. And that's where the creepypasta ends. Definitely a strange one for sure. While it may not be the best by any means, I still recommend giving it a search. These lost episode ones have always been interesting to me. Now you may or may not have heard about the one I just read to you, but I'm sure the next ones will be far more recognizable. On to the next creepypasta.
Sonic.exe is a classic. The game at least. The story was released back in August of 2011 on the Creepypasta wiki. The story's alright. OP receives a CD from a friend and plays a spooky Sonic game where he has hyper-realistic blood eyes and kills everyone, including OP, because a Sonic plush comes to life and kills them. Don't get any funny ideas. The story has its cliches, which caused it to get moved from the Creepypasta wiki to the Trollpasta wiki, where OP threw a big old tantrum. Other bad stuff has happened, but that's not what I want to cover. Instead, let's talk about the fan game created by Adam Gavigan back in 2012. Similar to Slender Man, I think EXE became really popular because around the same time, Let's Plays started to become popular, especially Let's Plays of spooky games. Good chance you learned about this game through PewDiePie, Markiplier, maybe even Dan and Phil. The game is passable, the bloody troll face instantly dates it, but I'm sure it gave a bunch of people a good spook almost 10 years ago. Huh. It felt really weird to say that. EXE still has a decent following, with people still making fan games and adding to the story in their own ways. There's even a Friday Night Funkin' mod with them, cause, of course. Sonic.exe is alright, but I think there's two creepy Sonic stories that are a little more iconic. At least, to me. Tails Doll's first and only playable appearance in a game was in Sonic R for the Sega Saturn, and his appearance was enough to make people feel uneasy. I mean, with no mouth and a blank stare, I could see why people didn't exactly like this thing. Now, the most common creepypasta for this little two-tailed demon is Tails Doll, My Story. From what I could find, this story came out sometime around 2010 to 2012. The oldest version I could find of it was from an audio reading done by Mr. Creepypasta. He provided a source to the original story, but sadly the story was kicked off the Creepypasta wiki on November 14th, 2013. That seems to be the time when a lot of video game creepypastas were taken off the wiki. I tried using the Wayback Machine to hopefully find a saved capture of it when it was still on the website, but sadly no luck. Thankfully the story can still easily be found, but the original is sadly lost. The actual story is nothing special. A dad buys a copy of Sonic R for his kid and notices the Tails doll, which creeps him out. One night the dad decides to sneak into the boys' room and play Sonic R. He decides to play as the Tails doll. After having some fun with the game, the system just shuts itself off. Does the man go, "Huh, that was weird"? No, he decides it's time for bed. A couple hours later, the man hears thudding at his door, which he ignores. But after a while, he opens the door to find the Tails doll standing there, holding a knife. It's nothing too special, but hey, it helped with the creepiness of the character. I'd say personally I liked what Some Call Me Johnny did with the character. Instead of making him scary, it just made him a little jerk who bugs him. Tails doll has made appearances in the comics. In the Archie comics, he's a little spy bot for Eggman that gets punted out of existence. And in the Sonic 30th Anniversary special by IDW, he's just there, creeping out everyone by him. His most recent appearance is in the Sonic Minecraft collab where he's just chilling in Tails' workshop. With Tails doll out of the way, it's time for one of my favorites. Sonic CD is pretty cool. It came out in 1993 for the Sega CD. The game has some pretty cool secrets. If you enter a code on the title screen, you can enter a secret sound test. And if you set the sound test to a certain setting, you can view secret drawings done by various people who worked on the game. This one's cute. No, this one's my favorite. And, oh my. The text reads, "Infinite Fun, Sega Enterprises, image by Majin." But the most common translation is, "Fun is infinite with Sega Enterprises." Now the image in the background is Sonic with some kind of really messed up face. Looks almost human. All the pictures play a song from the game, like the one of Sonic just chilling plays Palm Tree Panic Good Future, and my favorite one plays the theme from Metallic Madness Present. But what about this one? Just the boss theme, which is funky and silly if you're playing the game with the Japanese soundtrack. To put it simply, the game has two different soundtracks, one for the US and one for Japan and PAL region. Now the US version of the boss theme is, well... So when most people found the secret screen and were greeted by this image along with the music, yeah, I could see why it's scary. Even I got a little scared when I first saw the image. Now, Majin. What's the deal with that? Well, Masato Nishimura was the landscape designer, and even the voice of Sonic in Sonic CD. And when it came to the image, he decided to put his childhood nickname on the image so it was easy to figure out who it was done by. He did a similar thing like this in Shenmue, where a glass of milk was labeled Majin milk. Well, thanks Nishimura for all the creepy memories.
For my final creepypasta, I've decided to only summarize the first chapter, because I think it's well worth a read on your own. Our story begins with the writer talking about the NES Godzilla game. Godzilla, Monster of Monsters. He goes on to mention how he received it for his 10th birthday, and would play it every chance he had. A while later he would end up trading the game for another one, and many years later, as an adult, he would get himself an NES and decide he would replace some of his childhood games. His close friend, Billy, managed to get a copy of the game for him, along with a few others. Excited to play his childhood games, he popped it in, eagerly started playing. It was just as he remembered it, at least, it was right now. As he smashed his way through the levels, he finally came across the first boss, Godzilla. When the fight started, Godzilla backed him into a corner and spammed an attack, the usual move for the game. But this time it wouldn't stop. The game had somehow glitched itself, lasting nearly 5 whole minutes. The graphics became red, scattered all over across the screen. Confused by this, he promptly removed the cartridge and put it back in, then fighting the boss a second time, finally defeating it. Then, it was on to the next planet, Mars. Oddly enough, when looking at the board, Varan was replaced with Titanosaurus. The writer was excited. Not only was he playing his childhood game, but was also playing what seemed to be a prototype of the game. He then fought Godzilla again, only to have the glitch happen when he beat Godzilla. This time, the glitch consumed the monster, spreading the texture for its eye all across the screen. He then promptly ignored it, and then moved on to the Mugiwara fight, where the monster was twice the size he should have been. After fighting it, his sprite glitched and shattered, which startled the writer. Cautious to avoid glitches, he then moved carefully to fight Titanosaurus. The fight went relatively well. Once he was done, he took over the enemy base, and was ready to move to Jupiter, or as it said instead, Pathos. Little did he know the horrors that lie waiting for him ahead. And that's where I think I'll end it for now. This is easily my favorite, and there's still 7 more chapters. I highly recommend you go and read it. And if you're up for the challenge, there are fan games that copy the story down to a T and are really well made. I'll have the link to one of them in the description. This creepypasta is probably one of the most descriptive I've read, and has pictures accompanying every single chapter. I really can't recommend the story enough. Without further ado, the final creepypasta of the video.
Ben Drowned is my all-time favorite creepypasta. I just had to get that out of the way before I start. Even after so many years, it still makes my skin crawl. The story was created by Alex Hall, known online as Jadusable, and the story was posted on 4chan's paranormal board between September 7th and September 15th, 2010. I'm only going to cover the first post, as it's already a long read, but also I really want you to check it out for yourself, as even after 11 years, I still think the story holds up. Let's get started. Alex puts out a post onto the paranormal board of 4chan asking for some help, as he just experienced something terrifying with Majora's Mask. He gives some background explaining that he'd recently moved into his college dorm room, and that his friend gave him his old Nintendo 64. He decided to go to some local garage sales to hopefully find some games. And after finding a couple, he makes one last stop by a house that only has one table set up. He is greeted by an old man, who he doesn't feel easy about, but he still asks the man if he has any games. Which, surprisingly, he does. The old man hands him a Nintendo 64 cartridge with Majora written on it in permanent marker. The old man says he can have it for free, and Alex leaves excited. The old man says something to him, but being so excited at the thought that this could be a beta or pirated version of the game, he ignores what the man says. He makes it back to the dorm room and starts up the game, noticing a save file labeled Ben. He then realizes what the old man said. Goodbye, Ben. Alex passes this off as if the old man is going senile, and that he probably reminded him of his grandson Ben. He decides to leave the file alone out of respect and instead makes another file called Link, because of course he would. The game ran pretty smoothly, but there were a couple of glitches, the worst one being that NPCs would sometimes call him Ben instead of Link, which creeped Alex out to the point that he deleted Ben's file. The first mistake of many to come. He sets the game down for the night and comes back the next day to perform the 4th day glitch. But instead of the glitch working, he is sent to the Majora's boss fight room at the end of the game with Skull Kid hovering over him. He gets nervous and tries to move around the room. After a while, a text box pops up asking if he wants to go to the lair of the temple boss. He hesitantly presses yes, to which he is sent to what is basically a Twilight Zone version of Clocktown. Everything was gone. The music now replaced by the Song of Healing in reverse, with it getting louder and louder. He noticed every now and then that the laugh of the happy masked salesman could be faintly heard. Alex is on the verge of tears as he tries to leave the town, but the game just sends him back to another part of the town. It gets to the point where he comes up with the idea to drown himself in the laundry pool, hoping it will spawn him somewhere else. But as soon as he runs for the pool, Link grabbed his head as the screen flashes various images until it returns to the Link statue staring at him. He screams as he runs back into town. No matter where he ran, the statue would teleport behind him, almost as if it was chasing him. After running around for a while, the screen fades out. When it fades back in, he is standing on top of the clock tower with Skull Kid hovering over him. He shoots Skull Kid a couple times with arrows. Link's dead body was just laying there on the floor, as Skull Kid just floated over him. Then the game kicked him to the title screen. The Link save file was now replaced with "Your turn." Alex clicked on it, only for it to send him back to Link's dead body. After resetting, Ben's save file appeared right back where it was. Alex turned off the game and tried to get some sleep, but with the reverse song of healing ringing in his head, he didn't get much. The next day, he goes back to the old man's house to ask him a question. He also brings a friend along, the best idea he's had so far. When they arrive, the house is empty, only thing there being a for sale sign in the front. Now that everything is caught up, Alex says he'll document everything he can, as he feels that something is calling out to him to be investigated even further. He says next time he's going to record everything all the way through, as he didn't get the idea to record until the very end. He ends the thread by saying he hopes that this was just some kind of gag or hacked copy of the game, because it's just scaring him. Now I would love to read you more of this story, but this video is already long enough. I highly recommend reading the rest of this story, as there are so many good parts I didn't even get to cover. You didn't get to see much of it here, but use of the game footage is what really sells this creepypasta. Being able to see it and not just imagine it gives it that extra push that is needed to make this go from unsettling to genuinely creepy. This is it. The story that terrified me the most when I was a kid. And damn would I be lying if I said I don't get a little chill just from thinking about it. Easily the best creepypasta in my book. And that's all of them. I had a blast doing research on all these. There's some parts of the stories that I forgot about after so many years, and some still really hold up to this day, and others are pretty cheesy but memorable. How'd you feel about it, Lem?
I personally had a fun time reading through all these, some of my favorites being Abandoned by Disney and Godzilla NES, the latter being a lot longer than I expected it to be, honestly. While some of the other ones I did were a bit more generic, I'd say.
Alright, time to wrap this up. If you enjoyed this type of video, please let me know about it in the comments. Also helps if you like the video, and if you haven't yet, maybe consider subscribing. I have more videos planned for the future. I'll let Lem promote their stuff now.
Well, I don't have anything to promote at the moment. I am working on a few things, so keep an eye out for that.
Well, time for me to crawl back into my cave. See you later.
I'm out.
Okay, see you later. Hey, wait! You dropped something. Wait, that looks like... couldn't be. It wouldn't kill me if I tried it on just once, right? Alright, you just put it on here and that's not too bad.